Austin 316 says I just whipped your ass.
And what's it gonna do?
It doesn't matter how you're doing. Woo! Wheeling, dealing, limousine right, jet flag.
Can you dig it, sucker?
Would you please shut the hell up?
You don't know what hard times are, Daddy.
The cream will rise to the top, oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Look at the human rumble.
What up, what up? It's another week of Keep the Kayfabe. I'm Matt, not Mike, sitting here with my boys, well, some other boys, ready to talk some wrestling. And we're going to talk a lot about AEW Dynamite tonight, and what a great show we had last night here in Milwaukee. It's feeling like summer, and last night's show was hot, hot, hot. But before we get into the details, let's talk to the boys real quick. Over in Glendale, somebody who always keeps it regal, my guy and best friend, Steve Grobschmidt. Steve, how you doing?
Matt, you know what makes Daddy mad? Because his nipples hard. You want a taste?
Seriously, I don't skip the commercials or DVR AEW Dynamite because every time there's a DraftKings commercial and that guy makes an appearance, I can't help myself. It's just the best.
We almost had a tragic event that we'll discuss later on where those nipples were in peril.
Oof.
Yeah,
well,
not good.
Well, we're going to hear more about that, but you may have just heard another voice there alongside Steve. Longtime listener and occasional host of the show, Gary Williams, joins us tonight from Glendale, Wisconsin.
That's correct. I am a real American. Fight for the rights of every man. I am a real... And now, I will say that the reason why I brought up but yes, hi everyone. Yes, this is Gary, and you probably know me from the Takeover episodes that Steve and I have been kind of doing. But I live in Ohio, as many of you know, but obviously my hometown is here in Milwaukee. And so when the show came up, Steve and my brother and I decided we were going to get tickets together, and it would be like just like going back to literally old school, old times. And it was a blast. We had a lot of fun. And but Matt, I will say that there is a reason why I brought up Hulk Hogan today.
Oh, and what is that?
Well, so when we think about the house shows, and we'll get right into the AEW show yesterday, you always have to remember, like, the way that a show is taped is quite a process, right? And so for anyone who's never been to a taping, while there's only the 2 hours that you see, there is literally, we were there close to 6.5 hours for the whole event.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it started a little bit after 5.
Yeah, it was advertised as starting at 6, and we got there at what, 5:45, and there was like Ring of Honor matches going on. Like, and they didn't even advertise they were starting early. It was weird.
Yeah, so I mean, they there was about, I don't know, an hour and 15 minutes worth of Ring of Honor. That culminated with a pretty awesome, what I thought was a pretty good main event for that show that they were taping. It was Samoa Joe and Colt Cabana, which was, he's a cult classic here in the Chicago, Milwaukee area, right? So that was a pretty awesome kind of little end. And then they kind of take a little bit of a break, and then they get you jacked up for Dynamite. And so I guess the thing, it's hard because, like, back in the day, now I don't mean to go old school on this new school podcast, but we were in that very arena, that mecca, in grade school. Believe it or not, when we were in grade school, and we went to what was the equivalent of their WWF tapings. They were taping superstars of wrestling, and here's the thing that was so different though. The card that they advertise, it only had like a certain number of matches, and one of which was the carrot was, it was Hulk Hogan against Big John Studd. But the thing was, they taped 3 episodes, so they did 3 hours worth of tapings.
Oh,
and then when the show, quote unquote, ended, they brought out the main event. And I, as I was talking with Steve earlier today, this is like quite a difference from the way that tapings are done today. Like when you think about Raw or even Dynamite, the carrot in the old school, to sit through 3 hours was you were going to see Hulk Hogan and Big John Studd or whatever the main event was, right? In a quote unquote dark match that was going to end the show and leave you going home happy. Last night we sat there for 6.5 hours, and the very last match was Lee Moriarty against Takeshita. Now, love those guys, but come on, how are you going to keep a crowd? Right?
And they didn't.
And there ended up only being a couple thousand people in there. But the thing that's frustrating in listening to people who are kind of like, oh, Milwaukee didn't seem like a hot crowd. They were, but we were there 6 hours. Yeah. And so it's hard to stay up that whole time. It's just not, it was really disappointing to hear people today, whether it was on the internet or on Busted Open, and be like, oh, it wasn't such a good crowd. We had a blast.
Yeah, and the crowd around us was hot.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to criticize Tony Khan a little bit for some of the things. Like, Gary, you were talking about how you guys got there, and they were already doing Ring of Honor tapings prior to the show.
Yeah, and I thought I missed something, and I looked at my email they sent me reminding me, and it's like 6 o'clock. It's like, where did this 5 o'clock thing happen?
Yeah, Matt, you make a great point, because you're right. And I think about this. I was at the Dynamite in Ohio at the Nutter Center. I've been to Raw in Columbus. Now just at this show, I was at House Rules. I mean, like, when I was at House Rules, I'm telling you, it was like a total throwback, and it was a very concise 3-hour show, and it left you home happy. It flowed great. No television. Guys were comfortable. It's just, TV's just a different flair when they're taping.
It is. And sitting there in person. So I've also attended a few episodes of Dynamite. And yeah, it can be a little bit of a marathon. I think especially now with the way AEW is set up, where they have Ring of Honor as this off-brand sort of opening the show. And then you have all these dark matches that are filmed for YouTube. Mm-hmm. And then you finally get to Dynamite, where you've already seen a bunch of great wrestling. So if you don't see more great wrestling on Dynamite, the show can really fall flat. And then on top of that, you have AEW Rampage following Dynamite, which, as we all know, for the past several months has not been the most well-booked show on the planet. So having that as the carrot, like you said, to send the fans home happy, isn't really smart booking on Tony Khan's behalf when it comes to booking live events like this. So my hope is that in the future, at some point, they rethink this, given all the brands and extensions and other shows that they're trying to film in one sitting. And maybe, do we split up Ring of Honor and Rampage into its own event? I don't know. It's an option.
Yeah,
I guess we'll have to see where they go.
I don't know. What do you think, Steve? I mean,
yeah, no, I get why they do it, because, like, if there's one thing I've heard from the the guys that have done TV for decades in wrestling, is that it's really expensive, and that's why they do Rampage as a taped show, because it's infinitely more expensive and logistically complicated to do if Rampage was done live, for example. But yeah, I mean, it's the only thing that's live is the 2 hours. Everything around it isn't. So yeah, you could separate that into its own, as long as it's not live. I would think the Ring of Honor and Rampage tapings could happen on a different day in a different city, whatever. So yeah, I don't know. It is interesting.
When you think if it's long for us, Matt, when we were walking out of Panther Arena, we crossed the street heading to the car, and there was Darby Allin.
Yeah, we walked right past them and talked to him briefly.
And he had a match at 7 o'clock, and we were walking out at 11:45, and he was just getting to his hotel. And so imagine how early he probably got there. And so, like, for those guys, like, it's also a marathon. But then again, given today's wrestlers that are doing these, really maybe marathon days, it's not like, and we had this argument on the run today. We were trying to decide, like, we saw Vikingo and Darby Allin again, right? And those guys are just, I mean, it's just like you keep saying to yourself, like, there's no way they're going to be alive in like 10 years. Just the way they throw themselves around, right? But then you think, like, well, but is what they're doing only 1 or 2 days a week, right? How different is that really from what, say, Ric Flair did every single night for 60 minutes?
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good point. you can always balance how much effort these guys put in, how much they put their bodies through nowadays versus what they did back in the 80s when, they're touring 300 days a year. Now that's not the case, especially with AEW.
Right.
But yeah, all interesting stuff. But this is all really good. I want to hear more, though, about Dynamite and the experience you guys had for the show. Because obviously a lot of the listeners out there saw Dynamite on TV, but you were both there in person. Steve, I know you had posted a photo on Instagram of you in the crowd. And did Jon Moxley happen to walk your way? I thought you had also sent us a video on the group.
Yeah,
thread.
we did send you the video because we were like in the 100 section, which was it was barely elevated from the floor. So it wasn't like it was up a whole section, but it was back. So there was like the floor seating, a big aisle, and then we were at the railing of the first row.
Well, Mike would appreciate we were at ice level, so we would have been right on the edge for an
Admirals game.
Game, we were right at ice, right up by the boards. He would have really appreciated.
But yeah, we were right along that wall, and you could kind of tell something was going on because they inexplicably opened up some doors in the back, like kind of near us. And then the cameras were starting to get positioned, and the guards or the security was. So we knew that when the Blackpool Combat Club was coming, they were coming down our aisle. And sure enough, I mean, we showed you the video, but for those listening to this with the theater of the mind, Blackpool Combat Club walked right past us, and Gary here, while cheering them for the most part, when Wheeler Yuta was inches from his face, what did you tell him? He sucks.
Like, you're a fool. You're the worst. I'm not a Wheeler Yuta fan. But
he's not a good heel. I don't think
he's not. But in true group fashion, Sammy Guevara brought this up in an interview not too long ago when he was, if you remember, I think it was when he and Darby and Jungle Boy and
the Pillars
were in that, and he was like, you all thought I was Chris Jericho's lackey, but it's true that every group has to have that
lackey,
that kind of guy. And it wasn't until, so up to this point, I have to say, it was not until Bryan Danielson came out that I understood better where they were going with this. Because up to that point, I was not feeling it.
Oh yeah.
I could totally understand that. I've had mixed feelings on Wheeler Yuta over the last several months, and I think a big piece of it is he's not a great heel. Like, he's a great baby. Fighting from underneath, I mean, he can definitely go in the ring. Like, there's no question about that. So you put him in a situation where he's making a comeback or fighting from underneath, he's phenomenal. But the moment he starts whining or just showing any heelish tendencies, it comes across as like, man, you're just a loser. So
yeah, and I think that's right on. And I think for me, when he's never been a great promo, but when you're a good guy and you're talking trash to like MJF, it comes across awkward, but there's sort of this earnestness. Like, it's like, he's trying.
Yeah.
But when you're trying to be this super menacing, like sneering villain, and you're not good at promoing, really, it feels like he's trying. He's like cosplaying being a bad guy.
I will say the show started hot. It really did. I mean, I felt like the Darby Allin Swerve Strickland match
was a great match.
It was great. The only drawback I had to that was I wish I had gotten more story of why those two guys were really connected well before AEW, because it did appear slightly random and put together.
Did they talk about that on the announcing?
They did, yeah. So they kind of filled in the gaps. And I think that's one thing Excalibur does really well for the listeners and viewers at home, is he's always talking about the history of people, whether it even extends to other companies. He'll go into it. Anything to build a story into a match, AEW, I think, does everything they can. And sometimes that's good, sometimes it's a little too much, but they do it. When you're there in person, yeah, it can really go either way. I think that's the risk of TV wrestling, especially with something like Dynamite.
Right.
You might get a really great 10-minute promo. And if you're not a promo person, then, well, I'm going to run to the bathroom or go get another beer at that point. But if you get a match that's halfway decent or really intricately worked, I think is probably the most common. Sometimes they can kind of get lost on a crowd without having someone like Excalibur leading you through it and explaining the backstory to it. So I could totally maybe see how you guys we're into the match, but maybe not quite that much. I think for the viewers at home, it really hit home. The first, I would say 5 minutes of the match, it really seemed like the crowd was sitting there quietly like, okay, what are we getting into? What is tonight's episode of Dynamite really going to be like? But by the end of that match, I feel like everyone started to come to life. Is that kind of what you guys experienced in the building?
That's weird that you say that, because it truly, to me, felt like we were rocking and rolling right from the beginning.
Yeah, I would definitely say a crescendo near as it built up, and I mean, from when he came out on, Darby he's still mega over. I mean, like, he got huge reaction, but yeah, I'd be interested. I have to go back and watch it because I'd be interested because and part of it, admittedly, too, we were in a pretty fun area. There was these dudes behind us that were like hamming it up with us, and but in a good nature, not like a vulgar awful way. Like, we were all having fun, and so I mean, it always felt like people were up, except the women's match, which we'll get to later. But no, I would say it felt pretty consistent, but it definitely picked up as the match went on because it got really good.
What I am curious about, Matt, is after the match. So how did the sequence go? Because I have not seen the television version of this, but what was awkward for us was it seemed like MJF came out, and then for us, he disappeared and then reemerged. What was that sequence like for you watching it on television?
That's really interesting you say that. I was actually going to ask what happened because, so for those of our viewers who maybe, are trying to follow us here, so the match ends, Darby Allin ends up winning over Swerve Strickland. He's still in the ring sort of celebrating for a moment, recovering, and then MJF's music hits. MJF walks down to the ring, and for the viewers at home, it went to a commercial. So when they went to a commercial, it sounds like what may have happened in the building is they knew MJF had to sit for a few minutes before, starting to just rip Darby Allin apart on the mic. And so maybe they thought, oh, let's just set him aside, like maybe he didn't have any material for the commercial break. I've heard as of late, he's been really getting into it and like just going all out, uncensored.
Well, that happened.
Okay, so that happened.
Yeah.
So that must not have been on
TV.
On TV.
No, he basically he dropped F-bombs that were uncensored and then proceeded to say that the only thing noteworthy about Milwaukee is Jeffrey Dahmer. But the worst thing is, like, he wishes Jeffrey Dahmer had finished the job and killed everybody. Yeah, he went into a really.
It was really good, but he did leave us with something that I wondered if you caught, which is he said about the only thing that was good around here, or the only thing you're good at, is cheese and beer. And there were multiple times throughout the night when there were crowd chants of cheese and beer, like cheese and beer.
Yeah, so okay, this makes way more sense. Watching the show, there were moments throughout the show where I did not know what the crowd was chanting, and part of it was I'm like, are they just not that loud, or what's going on? I think it's my TV, so take it for what it's worth. But having you guys say that, I feel like clears things up a lot for me, because there were moments where it sounded like cheese and beer, like that rhythm. So cheese and beer totally makes sense, and in that context, I get it. So pretty crazy show so far. But yeah, MJF comes out. He and Darby have what I think was probably the best promo of Darby Allin's career up to this point.
Gary Toll, go ahead.
I mean, we can't make this up. I can't believe you set me up like that. We literally, as we were across the street and saw Darby Allin, trust, and we can go for days about marks, and we're all marks, but the guys that are just like, I mean, there was a guy that was like, Darby, my sister is, so sick and she needs you to sign this jacket. And it's like, oh my God. But I will say that I was like, hey, Darby. And he's like, hey, man. And I'm like, Darby, you were awesome tonight. By the way, that was one of the best promos I've ever heard you say. And he goes, gracias, man, gracias. And so it was, he wasn't being, he
looked tired, but he looked he was polite.
He was totally. But I meant it. Like, that was a damn good. So you compare that promo with Sammy Guevara's promo, blew him out of the water. Blew him out of the water.
For sure. I always mention this on these episodes, but I was listening to the What Culture podcast today, as I tend to do on Thursdays, to catch the Dynamite review. And they talked so much about how Darby Allin versus MJF could be a singles title match on its own at this point, because if you think back to that Pillars moment, what was it, probably about a month ago now, Jungle Boy, he's still got some work to do, unfortunately, on the mic. Sammy Guevara, same deal, and quite frankly, I don't know that the crowd will ever accept him for.
I don't think not anytime soon.
No.
Yeah. So that leaves Darby, who, just can totally stand on his own. Don't get me wrong, a 4-way match would be phenomenal. Darby Allin on his own, still phenomenal. So it's really great you guys had a chance to, give him that feedback. Maybe he'll take it to heart. We'll see.
He was phenomenal. MJF was himself, but the showstopper, show stealer was Sting.
That was a great Sting promo. He doesn't usually go into as much as he did. Like, name dropped Cody, name dropped Ric Flair, name dropped couple other people I'm just drawing a blank on. Dusty maybe, but Hall and Nash. Yeah, it was just it was like a real different promo for him in AEW times, and that whole segment was pretty good.
And I even said something to Steve at the time. I said, this went on a little longer, but for me, now again, we are old school wrestling fans, but that promo, so to your point, Matt, that promo spot was worth the price of admission. Like, to me, that was as valuable as a match, because we in our generation of wrestling love storytelling. So that was captivating for me. I could have watched stuff like that multiple times in the night. In fact, we're going to talk about one probably in a little while. It might be a spoiler, but I think it'll be worth talking about. In an FTR interview that happened later on was also very phenomenal. That will be put on Rampage.
Excellent. Great. I can't wait to talk about that. I will say, regarding Sting, just one more thought on that. I've talked about this before on past episodes. I was not a WCW guy growing up. I totally get the hype behind Sting, because I didn't really know any of his stuff before he came into AEW. And my God, like, every time he talks, every time he wrestles, like, by the end of the match, I'm like, that's the match of the night, or that was the promo of the night. He's always, like, he never misses. It's great.
Well, you think in Steve, you can maybe jump in too on this, but I think about the largest pops of the night, and they centered around some of those old school guys, Sting, and then obviously the largest. I mean, the building shook when Jeff Hardy came out.
Yes, that was very obvious, even on TV. I was kind of thinking to myself, wait, Matt Hardy's already in the ring, and then it hit me, oh, Jeff's coming to save him. And then I thought, wait, didn't they do this exact same angle when he first debuted? But whatever.
It still worked.
Didn't matter.
Yeah, we'll get to it in a little bit. I don't want to get too crazy here. But anyway, so we go to a commercial. Sting had just been in the ring. What was the next match? Do you guys recall?
It was Hobbs. Hobbs came out then, and didn't he wrestle Silas? Which we were really disappointed in, because we really thought, with Silas being a Milwaukee guy, and he got a pretty good pop for a guy that we knew was gonna have to do the job, but I didn't think it was gonna be that big of a squash match. Like, it was a squash, and like, I get it, but I also thought, like, this would have been a cool opportunity to put a guy over that's a local guy. Did they talk about him being local did they bring that up at all on the telecast?
Sort of. It mainly started with Justin Roberts mentioning that it was an open challenge, which I'm sure you guys heard in the building as well.
Yeah. And
that's sort of the same way Excalibur and the other commentators framed it. The match starts, goes maybe 1-2 minutes, and then that's the end of it. Gary, I agree with you. I was a little confused by this, because I want to say it was maybe a year ago, the last time Dynamite was here in Milwaukee, we got to see Silas Young, local Milwaukee wrestler, take on Hangman Page for 15 minutes. And
it was a really good match. Good match.
Both guys looked phenomenal. So you'd think they'd do something like that, knowing Silas can go, just to make Hobbs look a little bit better. But yeah, it was really a squash. I think it was just there was no other reason to have the match than to get to the angle after the match with the car.
Very true.
Yeah, and we were chuckling while that was going on, because there's no way it was that dark. So that clearly was done the night.
Must
before.
have been done the night before.
It
couldn't have been that dark. And then Wardlow couldn't have, because then they played his music. there's no way he could have gotten out of that thing through the building into the arena in like seconds.
So I mean, we're good at suspending judgment, man, but I mean that was even a little stretch for us.
I know, I totally agree. I was watching from home, and obviously the three of us are very familiar with Milwaukee. And looking at Wardlow smashing up that car, you could see the Fear the Deer billboard in the background, and then I'm thinking, okay, so he's actually on this street facing this way.
Exactly. And I'm not even. I have been gone from here for 6 years. And I was thinking the same. I'm like, wait a second, like that's the wrong street corner.
Yeah, it was interesting, and yeah, his magical appearance in the building 10 seconds later was equally miraculous. So yeah, it was a little silly knowing the city, but I will say the segment wasn't too bad. I think at first when he started smashing the car with the bat, it was like, oh dude, I don't think this does not look good. But then all of a sudden he busts out that, what was it? Almost like a pole that holds up the rope in front of a entrance and smashes the windshield. And then they turn to the forklift, and I'm like, there you go. Just get it over with.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, then after that, I mean, the next one was Buddy Matthews and Orange Cassidy,
which was outstanding.
Yeah. Match of the night for sure.
We were all about that match. I mean, I'm sorry. I know we're controversial in what our thought process is, but it's time for Orange to go. Like, I'm sorry.
Lose the title.
Well, I mean, I think the shtick is a little bit up by that. So I don't know. But boy, Buddy Matthews, hell of a freaking hand he is, because he wrestled an amazing match.
He did. Yeah. I mean, we could talk about this match all night. Orange Cassidy, so Steve has talked in past weeks about how Orange Cassidy needs to lose the title because you always know what's coming. But the thing is, every week,
I know,
I feel like it just keeps getting better, and he wins you over every time. I do think when he ends up ultimately losing that belt, it is going to be a big deal, which is great. Like, that's the best thing I think they could have hoped for. I'm curious who the next champion is at this point, but right now I'm still enjoying this Orange Cassidy ride. We'll have to wait and see who he fights next. For me, though, this was the match of the night.
Oh, yeah.
It was outstanding.
It was outstanding. Totally. I mean, there's no other bones about it.
So,
go ahead.
So I was just going to say, we had this match. What came next? Because whatever it was.
That was the big Ethan Page came out and was bitching about how, like, you know, there's been rough times with that faction, the Firm, is it? And then he calls out Matt Hardy and the young man from Private Party whose name I can't remember either. But anyway, it's all set up for, like, you know, there's a fracas, and then Big Bill and all those guys come up and they start beating the crap out of Matt and the Private Party guy, and then Hook comes out for the save, but the numbers are still against him, so he starts getting beat down. And then, as Gary alluded to minutes ago, the roof came unglued because Jeff Hardy made his long-awaited return, which host of the show Charlie had sent us a text earlier, like that there was rumors Jeff Hardy was in Milwaukee. And it's also funny because Matt Hardy said something this week. I forget the exact number, but he said something about how his brother's about 6 to 8 weeks away from coming back. It was total bullshit.
Yeah.
What a worker. Yeah. This was equally exciting at home. I mean, you could tell even on TV how loud the crowd was. And in that moment, I thought to myself, well, shit, that's what I get for not buying a ticket. But it was really cool. Charlie made my night because for those of our listeners, unfortunately Charlie couldn't be here tonight. The guy's got way too many underwear modeling gigs.
Yes,
but
I've heard
he
about
was also
these. I saw them. I saw him in person. And I asked him.
We did see him at the show.
He wasn't at the merch table selling any of his underwear, but I mean, it was good. It was good to see him.
Yeah, for sure. Charlie's a great dude, and he was phenomenal on TV. When Jeff Hardy's music hits and he comes running out, I think there was a moment where you could see the crowd. And Charlie, for those of our listeners who maybe have like seen pictures of him on social media or whatever, he's sitting like right in the middle and maybe 10 rows back, like plain as day on TV. And the moment Jeff Hardy's music hits, I think Charlie basically left his seat and the floor and the building because he was the visual indicator for the crowd the whole show. It's super entertaining to watch. Anyway,
well, I mean, I it's hard to deny the emotion of the moment too, because I don't know if they caught this on the camera, but he was almost starting to break down crying. Jeff Hardy was, at least. And it felt like it just felt amazing. And knowing his story, we can agree or disagree on his choices, but this is the reason why you hope, or wrestling is what it is, right? Because it's a story like this. It's a comeback story. It's a legit comeback story that we hope stays true. I mean, and as I heard Bully Ray say today on Busted Open, he's like, this is going to be his last chance. Like, there will be no rock. There is no tomorrow. There is no tomorrow. And he's going to have to. And so I, as an old school wrestling guy, totally pulling for the dude. And you felt it in the crowd. You felt
Absolutely.
it in the ring. It was cool. It was a cool moment.
Yeah. You could definitely tell on TV he was getting emotional. It was a really cool moment. And right after we had a really cool moment, of course, it's like, okay, guys, calm the crowd down, because we had a women's match. We honestly don't need to spend any time on this, and I feel bad saying that, but not a whole lot came of this. It's another iteration.
The 10-second thing I'll say on that one was that I don't know that I've ever witnessed a hot tag in a tag team match where the crowd had no reaction, and when Sky Blue made the hot tag, nothing, and I felt bad for them.
Well, but I don't know if this was caught though, but I will say I have learned a better appreciation for Saraya, because she does know how to rile up a crowd. And I mean, we were pretty far away, and she was screaming at us, like just yelling plenty of obscenities. And so that was a fun banter. But if it hadn't been for any of that, I wouldn't have even known the match was going on.
Yeah.
Interesting. Good to know. So in the interest of time for both our listeners and the Zoom moderators who are sponsoring tonight's podcast, there were two matches on this card that we haven't touched on yet. One was, well, it wasn't so much a match, it was Kenny Omega's return.
You're right.
Yeah.
And not just Kenny.
Yeah.
And not just Kenny, it was also the Young Bucks. So Kenny and the Bucks are back, now feuding with the Blackpool Combat Club. I did love in Kenny's promo that was pre-taped, there was the painting of him and Don Callis hanging in the background.
So great.
Yeah, that was good.
It never gets old.
I will say, I think you all might have talked about this on the podcast, wondering way back about like when Kenny Omega was returning, and you were like, why is he in these 6-mans? And a lot of it was because he wasn't physically really ready, but they needed him. Boy, he looked
jacked.
I mean, holy cow. Like, yeah. I was like, wow. Like, I was blown away.
It's amazing how much his body changes depending on his health, his workouts. It's really interesting to see. If you go back and watch some of his matches, it's definitely, anybody can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
But we'll say it was hot but although the Young Bucks just snuck up on everyone, so yeah, we didn't quite know what was going on. But then all of a sudden, the roof came off there too. I felt. I mean, it was pretty cool.
A lot of great moments, a lot of great matches. A really good episode of Dynamite, especially for the Milwaukee market. I feel like we usually get robbed when it comes to good segments, good matches, and this show did not disappoint.
Yeah, big returns, lots of good stuff.
Yeah, it was
for sure.
It just goes to show you, man. I mean, it's just one of those things where the disappointment for me was just hearing people kind of crap all over the town or the us fans that were there. But as Bully Ray said, he's like, at the end of the day, we're professionals. It doesn't matter if there's 5,000 there or 100 people or whatever. And he said the most important thing was, did those people who went have fun? And you know what?
We
had
absolutely
a freaking blast, and it was awesome.
Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of the show. We have a little bit of a short one tonight. For those of our listeners, if you like what you heard and you want to hear more of it, reach out to us. You can hit us up on Instagram at Keep the Kayfabe or Facebook at Keep the Kayfabe. Or if you've got a lot more to say and you want to address one of us directly, maybe you're jealous of Charlie for all these underwear modeling gigs and you want to give him a piece of your mind. You can email us at keepthekayfabe414@gmail.com. Well, all that being said, I guess, what do we usually say at the end of these shows?
And there's something with H's.
Yeah, right. Yes.
I think it's keep it Paul Levesque.
Paul Levesque. Yeah, well, it's 3 things. I know that. It's something about staying humble, staying hungry, staying hard.
Woo! Woo!
Last night, say she loved me so. Didn't matter anymore. I say she never cared and that she never will. Do it all again.